Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to the Scary Stories NYC Springtime Dogman Special. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. We've got over 2 hours of Dogman stories. We've got Madeline Starr. We've got Henry Lee Dogman. And we've got 4 or 5 executive producers. So just for this once, I'd like to skip our usual opening formalities and jump straight into this all-new recent Dogman story called Dogman Blocked Our Way to Quarantine. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when you encounter something like the Dogman, the way you react can often depend on the situation in which you encounter the beast. If you're alone, you may become frightened and panic. You may scream or cry or run away. If you come face to face with the monster while you are protecting a loved one, however, you may find that you have reserves of strength and courage that you never suspected before. I encountered the Dogman while trying to drive my sickly wife to safety. I'll tell you the whole story, so get comfortable, because it takes a minute. I was thinking the other day that if I had been with my original wife when the event occurred, I might have behaved very differently. I had no protective feelings for her because she was never loyal to me. I shouldn't say never. She was loyal when it was fashionable. She was loyal when it suited her purposes or when it got her more than she had before. Then, the very next morning, she might start a pointless fight with you, staring at you with eyes that appear to have never seen you before. She could refer to you in the third person, as though you were someone she just met and now wished would go away. And then the next moment, she might be close with you and tender. I've known people who I thought had no backbone. She was not one of them. Her backbone was more like a weather vane, straight up and down and rigid as could be, yet firmly implanted in whatever scene she was trying to make. The slightest breeze could send her spinning in a different direction, but she always remained in the same phony scenester place. You might say she was very firm about being very fickle. Our marriage nearly lasted a year, and that was in 1965 time. Quite scandalous within her community, but I never had a community, so I was glad to be free of her. It took almost 5 years before I allowed myself to admit that not all women were like my first wife. Actually, that wasn't my theory back then. What I thought was that I had been trained by my upbringing to be attracted to certain kinds of women in relationships, and that no matter how many times I tried, it would end the same way, because I would always end up with similar kinds of women no matter how hard I tried to do something different. However, Helen wasn't like my first wife, and after a few years of dating, she still hadn't in any way become like my first wife, so we got married. She stayed my best friend. She's always taken my side. I've never felt that we weren't part of an inseparable and equal team. No matter how familiar we've become, we choose to remain respectful of each other. That way, it feels like we've just met even though so many decades have passed. We raised 2 girls and 1 boy, and now we're retired and officially old people. We both live our life in gratitude for each additional day we're granted, as we each sometimes wonder if we've outlived our time and our usefulness. Helen's been having some health issues of late, and when we first got news about the oncoming worldwide health situation, our lawyer daughter Edna, not her real name, insisted we go live out in the country with her and her husband for the duration. I guess the law goes on hold when people start getting sick. We had a chance to drive to Edna's place in town and then get driven out to the country by her and her husband, but there was some delay on our end, and I ended up having to drive us out there myself in my old Cadillac. That car was top of the line when I bought it, but its better days are behind it, and I was a bit nervous when I heard there might be snowfall on the way up north. In fact, there was a whole lot of snowfall, and some of the roads, not just one, but at least two of them that I know of, had become impassable. We pulled off the highway and stayed at a motel for the night, but it was seedy and dirty, and Helen's health was responding negatively to the environment. I got on the horn with Edna, and it turned out her husband had some relatives nearby who could put us up in a clean room until the snow died down enough for us to make the rest of the trip. I was seriously beginning to regret having left the city in the first place. We probably would have been better off there. We could have had food delivered and stayed indoors and watched TV and been warm and safe. I had meant well listening to our daughter. I had wanted to make things better for my wife of over 50 years, and yet I had put her in a bug-infested room one night, and I was making her sleep with strangers the next. I was very unhappy with myself, and just as anxious to create a better situation for us. I resolved internally to talk seriously to Helen about the idea of going home to our own apartment and toughing it out there until the situation had blown over. She wasn't going to like the suggestion, so I fell asleep in my daughter's husband's cousin's guest's bedroom, going over the idea in my head, deciding how to phrase things to make what I said more likely to change her mind. The next morning, as luck would have it, enough of the snow had melted for the family to urge us to make the rest of the trek to the woods to stay with Edna. They were very polite to us, but they were clearly weirded out by having to put us up. I never had a chance to talk to Helen about the idea of going home when we'd been packed into our car with some snacks and drinks for the road and pointed back to the wilderness to the obscure location of our lawyer daughter's country home. Well, wouldn't you know it, when we got to the final third of the trip, when we needed to take a local roads and follow our GPS, the skies grew dark very quickly, and the snow started falling down in the darkness. I couldn't believe how dark it was out, since it must have been around noon of the day. I brought up my feelings that I wished we could just go home, but we both knew I was bringing up the idea too late. We were too far from home, and too close to my daughter's country place. We had to keep going. We had to make it to our destination. I sped up, but the roads were slippery, so I soon slowed down instead. I had neglected to put the snow tires on the car before we left. Or maybe I had forgotten. A feeling of doom overwhelmed me as I began to think that I was too old to be attempting what we were doing. I was just a year or two past my ability to be doing this. I was not only placing myself at risk, I was placing my beautiful wife at risk too. And the point of this was supposed to be to protect her health. I was full of misgivings and second thoughts, but I tried to focus on keeping my wheels inside my lane and keeping the old Cadillac moving forward. I was a nervous wreck, drenched in sweat, inside the cold car interior. I tried not to let it show, as Helen was acting in a carefree manner and I wanted her to stay that way. And then, the idea of remaining calm became quaint. The concept of not panicking became absurd. There, in front of us on the road, was something from out of some kind of devil-worshipping monster movie or something. I gasped, then wished I hadn't, because I made Helen look too. Now both of us were panicked, and my headlights fully illuminated what we were afraid of. There was a tall, shaggy man with devil legs standing in front of us on the road. It was partially covered in snow, as though it had been standing there for some time, waiting for us. Although not clothed, he was covered in what I at first took to be animal pelts, and then I realized it was actual real living fur growing out of his own body. It looked like a dog, but it looked like a man, and its fur was long and stringy and dirty. It was like some kind of a hippie devil dog, It almost looked as though it had been crossbred with a goat somehow. The evil, glowing eyes looked messed up in that way that goat's eyes can look. I mean, the eyes made it look like it walked out of hell itself, and the size of it was as intimidating as those eyes. It did not have horns on its head. It wasn't really a goat. It was a goat-like dog. It had dog ears, or maybe coyote ears, or fox ears, I don't know. The coloring was a sort of camouflage of different shades, blending into stripes here and spots there. It was mainly darker colors, browns and grays, although much of the fur may have been lighter colored if the creature ever got washed off. This thing looked like it had been rolling around in the mud, and for all I know, maybe it had been. The arms were held out in front of the creature, and they looked like the front legs of a dog, albeit with larger than usual paws and claws. I wondered why it walked on its hind legs if it had perfectly good front limbs, but it was so intimidatingly large. Maybe that was 100% of the reason why it walked that way. Maybe it only did it to scare the living daylights out of you. Well, that worked for me and my wife. I saw a glowing-eyed, filthy, upright dog with a mouthful of enough teeth for 3 dogs bare its fangs and begin running down the street directly toward us. My wife screamed and held her hands in front of her face in shock and horror. I did something counterintuitive, something born out of my impatience more than my logical mind. I started driving back, right at the monster. We were going to play a little game of chicken, he and I. I put my foot down, and I accelerated. Which of us would brake first? Would he get out of my way? Or was I going to have to think fast? In the seconds before we would have made our impact, I saw the creature's yellow eyes. I saw the direction they were looking, and I felt almost as though I could read the beast's mind. He was going to attempt to jump on the hood of our car as we impacted. I had a feeling that might result in something far messier than the monster was likely thinking. Still, I let him think I was going to keep driving straight forward as my wife screamed louder. At the last possible moment, I spun the wheel left and barely avoided harming even a hair on the body of that dog-like man-thing. It was thrown off balance, but managed to slam its front legs hard into my wife's passenger seat window as he sped past behind us. It cracked, and we both thought it was going to cave in on her. The window is still actually intact as I write this days later. We don't know when we'll be able to get it fixed, so our hope is that it can hold until the crisis is over. Anyway, back to that dark, snowy day. We had gotten past the Dogman. We felt we were home free. Now, we only had to beat the snow and defeat nature itself, but at least the Dogman was in our rearview mirror, right? Well, I meant that statement figuratively, but it soon became literally true. We encountered a bit of a slippery hill straight off after passing the Dogman, and the caddy was having trouble making it up to the top. We kept slipping and then regaining traction, and we were making it up, bit by bit. The trouble was, so was the Dogman behind us. I could see it in my rearview mirror, literally, and my wife was turned around, calling out the play-by-play like she was announcing for Wide World of Sports. Once we made it to the top, we could see that it was going to be all downhill for some ways after that. Helen screamed at me to hit the gas, but I chose a pace that I thought I could manage, and I watched as the Dogman behind us slipped far more than we did. Eventually, I think he got tired out, and it was only the endurance factor of our old gas-burning engine that pulled us through on that day. We got to our lawyer daughter's house all in one piece, and my wife has been treating me like her hero the entire time we've been here. She brags about me and shows me off. I was thinking how I could have done the same thing with my first wife, and she would have told everyone that I almost got her killed, that I drove past the Dogman, exposing him to her side of the window so that he could attack it. That was all technically true. She would have treated me as though I abused her She would have demanded victim credit for having survived the experience. Helen, though. Helen treats me like her king, or at least her white knight. It just goes to show. One half of your life is what you put into it, and the other half is you have people around you who appreciate your effort or don't. Will your work be cherished and nurtured so that it can resonate and grow? Or will it be trampled underfoot in disrespect by the dogs, either figurative or literal? Now that we are here at Edna's place, and we've been welcomed by her pleasant husband, Helen feels at home, and we're both content to wait out the crisis here. But we almost didn't make it to safety because Dogman blocked our way to quarantine. Don't go anywhere. We've got over 2 more hours of Dogman stories to go, and you've got the world's most talented and charming host to guide you through it. Take it away, handsome. I've got 2 more stories for you about Dogman allegedly showing an interest in real estate, which he might not have considered his sort of neighborhood before the recent health crisis. In one, the alleged witness allegedly observes some very human-like behavior exhibited by a Dogman. But before we get to that one, we have a very scary story from a guy who went to stay with his elderly aunt for the duration of the crisis, not having had it explained to him beforehand that her property seems to be haunted by something that sounds an awful lot like a Dogman. Hey, guess who today's executive producer is? Can't guess? Well, I'll tell you. It's Lycanthrope 4000. Thank you, Lycanthrope 4000. With you behind us, we become 4,000 times as confident. Seriously, we greatly appreciate your continued support, especially right now, with ad revenue dropping and so many people no longer able, at least for the moment, to support shows like this. Those of you such as Lycanthrope 4000 who are able to continue donating so generously are really helping us to keep coal burning in this old locomotive's engine. If you'd like to become a Scary Stories executive producer, such as Lycanthrope 4000 himself, just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Besides helping us out, you'll also get a secret, uncensored scary story every Sunday. Say, I brought this up once before, but YouTube has been so kind as to tell me I can now have channel memberships, even though we don't yet have 30,000 subscribers. It's very nice of them, but I read about it in their help section, and I don't even understand what it's saying. You would have to pay $5 a month, and I would give you badges and stickers? What does that mean? Is this for people who do live streaming? I don't do live events on this channel, it's all edited beforehand. At any rate, should we do this, or is it only for our live channels? I would hate to not use a tool that YouTube is granting me use of, but I don't understand what I'm supposed to do with it. I got all excited at first, now I'm just confused. Do any of you understand channel memberships? Can you explain it to an old Bigfoot? Okay, enough meta stuff about how Bigfoot don't understand the internet. On to our next story about encountering the Dogman while on lockdown. This person seems quite unhappy to have found himself thrust into the position of defending my aunt from the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my Aunt Clara had asked me to come and stay with her out in the country during the crisis. She's been alone for a few years now since my uncle passed, and she knew I would be out of work until this is all over. So it seemed to make sense to her that she feed me and give me a bed to sleep in, and I could help her with things that are getting harder for her to do around the house. I didn't know that one of my chores would be to defend her and the property against the Dogman. It used to be that you would meet and know someone, and they would meet and know you, and you would each know each other based on how you behaved toward each other. You used to be able to have your own personal relationship with that person. Then Failbook came along, and suddenly we all had to know every aspect of each other all the time, every day. There was no more such thing as a personal relationship. It was more as though we had police blotters on each other. I opted out of that rat race, and I've never regretted it once. I find that the less gossip I am exposed to, the lower my blood pressure goes. And so, I didn't know that my dear old aunt had been writing on her failbook for 13 or 14 months that she felt as though her property were being haunted by a cryptid, or else a spirit which mimics the behavior of a cryptid beast. She had never mentioned it to me in her emails or phone calls because she assumed I had already read about it online. That's another weird thing about people who are on Failbook. They assume you've read every bit of trivia online about them and memorized it. In the old days, if you seemed that interested in someone, it made people uneasy. Now they grow offended if you don't remember what they had for lunch the day before. I haven't got any idea what proper decorum looks like in 2020 to a generation brought up cursing at each other on the internet. So, I had been living socially distant since before this crisis all began. Just as less gossip meant a lower blood pressure, fewer human interactions meant less drama, meant less wasted energy, meant more work done, meant more personal satisfaction, meant more energy for more work, and more free time for play. But in this case, my philosophy, for the first time, let me down big time. If I had only been a little nosier, if I had only read my dear auntie's Failbook postings before agreeing to come stay with her during the pandemic, I might have guessed by her vague postings that I might be placing myself directly in the path of the skinwalker itself, some kind of a dogman. I thought I had been to my aunt's house before, but it turned out the one I remembered from my youth was located in Teaneck, New Jersey. This one is out in rural Pennsylvania, a long drive from Teaneck. It's in the woods, in the hills, and she only moved there after my uncle passed. Again, I would only have known this if I had read her online postings, as she never told me most of this in her emails. I look at humans, and they seem more like bees than thinking people to me these days. If you're not connected into the hive mind, which is tightly controlled by major corporations, then you don't get to know that your aunt moved. You don't get to know that you're moving from your perfectly safe apartment in a city by a cheap supermarket that you could have ridden out the quarantine in, collecting unemployment, to the eastern United States home of Dogman. If you asked me about Dogman 3 months ago, I would have thought you meant that foreign film that won awards recently, or else that series of humorous kids' books. I wouldn't have thought of a werewolf or an upright walking canine. And if I did understand that was what you meant, I would have thought you were joking, or else that you were Looney Tunes. I had never heard of the idea of there being real werewolves in the world, and as we all know, if we've never heard of something, that means it couldn't possibly exist. Right? Well, apparently not. At least not in the case of Dogman. He manages to show himself to me in fleeting glimpses, but never more than that. That's still more than he reveals to my auntie. Maybe her reflexes are too slow to turn in time to see the things I see. All I know is that the few things I get to see are horrible. If you want to talk about how many times I've become aware of his presence, I really can't do that. It feels like he's almost always there. I've never seen him standing there waiting for me to take a photo. I've never seen him parading by our windows, waving and saying hello. I've seen his form, then watched that form take a step back or sideways and make itself become removed from my view. But I saw enough to know that it was there. If it's a figment of my imagination, it manages to always look like a big, devil-legged Sasquatch with the head of an insane dog resting on its massive shoulders. There may be more than one of them, but if so, there is something about each of their presences near the house that causes me to feel ill at ease. I would say with certainty that I know exactly when they arrive because I feel drastically different. It, or they, seem to have us under guard. They seem to watch us almost all the time. This would be suicidal behavior if they were natural animals. What time do they spend hunting for food? How do they sustain themselves to continue to watch us and make the vibe so negative around here? At night, the dog, or dogs, become most disrespectful of my aunt and the property in general. She was unable to keep pets, having lost each of them, one by one. I suggested she get a goldfish, but she shot me a look of abject fear and told me that she felt the Dogman would break into the house to take that goldfish away from her. The Dogman created a constant, omnipresent feeling of doom and punishment, and it wasn't really possible to be happy in a situation like that, especially not for Aunt Clara. Yet, for some reason, she never expressed a desire to move out, nor would she allow me to suggest such a thing to her. She told me that she bought this place to be the place she would spend the rest of her days in. All my talk about how she might pass on here seemed foolish to her. Of course she would. That was why she'd come here. She knew that that would happen here. This was where she wanted it to happen. Maybe to her there is no difference between old age, father death, or the Dogman. But to me there was and is still quite a lot that they don't have in common. For one thing, Auntie's old age isn't likely to also prove fatal to me. I suppose I'm being selfish. After all, this is her horror house, not mine. Auntie had been hearing the house being bumped into in the night and wondered if it were a ghost. I heard the bumps too, and I knew it was the Dogman. Auntie wondered if what plagued her was immortal or immortal, solid or fantastic, because she never caught a better glimpse of the thing than a dark blur speeding away. One time she even mused that it might be some form of a shadow creature, born out of the absence of light and energy itself, a kind of anti-life, anti-animal. I saw the same blurs she was witnessing a little more clearly, and I recognized them as very quickly moving werewolves or dogmen. I saw the wolf-like ears on top, and I saw the demonic-looking legs below. I saw them run not unlike men, but with long tails streaming behind them as they whizzed past, faster than any human could ever hope to have its legs transported. I googled for real werewolves and found all sorts of material about the Dogman. One of the facts that I found is that people tend to report the creatures a lot when they venture out into the woods at exactly the place I'm staying at. I'm not gonna dox my auntie, but this house is located in the middle of a number of places where people have already reported upright walking canids. They also report a lot of other weird stuff out here too. Stuff that I don't even want to think about, like UFO abductions. That might be the one thing to me that's even scarier than Dogman. I don't want any implants, thank you. I don't want to be probed or any of that stuff. It makes me wonder, though, if aliens are from outer space, and if Dogman are from here, why do they both seem impossible to prove the existence of, and why do they both tend to appear in these woods I'm unfortunately living in right now? Like, why right here? If you could travel to any place in the galaxy, you would not choose these woods as your sole destination spot. Just trust me, you would not. There's not much to do even when there isn't a pandemic. Maybe the Dogman and the UFOs are both local to this place in a sense, or maybe they're even two aspects of the same trickster phenomenon. I say things like that when I haven't seen one of the Dogmen for a day, but then the next time I see one, my heart races, my adrenaline pumps, 'cause it sure looks, sounds, and feels to me as though there's a real, large, dangerous, and quite possibly intelligent monster animal right there, biologically existing outside the house, posing a real physical threat to me and my aunt nearly every waking second, and who knows how many sleeping ones. It takes a certain amount of your happiness and energy out of you each time you wake up and you know it's going to be another day of hiding from the Dogman, of hoping the house is strong enough to keep him outside. You never really do get enough sleep because the thing bangs on the outside of the house every hour or two, irregularly, messing up your sleep cycles. I wandered around the property by myself around noon yesterday, asking my aunt to keep a watch on me from one of the windows in the back of the house. I was looking for prints of something large. I wanted to know if I might be able to solve the mystery by identifying the tracks. What if I had been seeing a large cat instead and was confused by what I had seen peripherally? What if it were actually some kind of dog or wolf? I found no tracks, although I did see some large scat in the grass. It had to have come from a big creature, but I really don't want to go picking up animal poo and bringing it into my auntie's house, so it's not going to get identified. It probably belongs to a deer anyway. I found no bones or remains of anything, but I did not enter into that forest. I only walked up to the edge of the tree line in the back. Again, I begin to wonder what the true nature of the creature is, and if it's an animal in the normal sense. I will continue to suggest that we move out of here, but it seems unlikely that we'd be able to move anywhere for at least some time. We're both going to try sleeping with white noise tonight, turned up loud. Maybe it will block out the Dogman. Update. I was going to review this email and send it to you this morning, but last night, something new happened. I woke up in the middle of the night even though I'm not sure if anything happened. My white noise was up loud, and I lowered it, and then I listened. Not hearing anything, I got up and I looked out the window. There, in the forest, I saw eye shine. I realized what kind of eye shine I was looking at. It was very bright with a yellowish quality to it. It was the eye shine of the Dogman. When I realized that, I also remembered that I had seen that eye shine on a number of prior occasions at my aunt's house since I had gotten there. I just never made the connection before. Every day I wonder when this will end, or when I will be able to get out of here. Right now, it feels like I'll be stuck here for the rest of my life, defending my aunt from the Dogman. I saw Dogman using a tool. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I live in a suburb of Milwaukee, and I not only saw a Dogman this past Thursday night, but I saw it using a tool. This is proof not only that Dogman possesses intelligence at least equal to that of primitive humans, but also that it must have opposable thumbs in order to have been able to hold and manipulate the tool in the manner that I saw it do. My home has a 9-foot-tall wooden fence with the pickets placed close enough together that it is very hard, although not completely impossible, to peek into our yard from between the slats. Our gate is hidden from the outside. You not only need to know where to go, but you have to use the correct key card to get in. Getting out is easy. We have a lever that you turn manually like a doorknob that opens the gate from that side. Your other option to break in would be to jump the fence, and I would say that would be a lot easier than getting past the lock system. That's why I've been pushing my wife to let me install security cameras. At least then if someone jumps the fence, we have the entire thing on video, and that can help the cops catch the guy. It would make me feel a lot safer if we had video of everything that happened on our property or immediately outside of it. My wife says that makes me the definition of paranoid, but I think it's just a standard and logical safety precaution in this day and age. So, that's all changed now. She's letting me install the camera system finally. I've ordered it already with my stimulus check, and I can't wait till it gets here. Now I'm going to tell you the story that changed my wife's mind. If she had let me install the cameras before, then maybe I'd have video to show you of this incident. On the other hand, I suspect the creatures can sense cameras, so maybe if there had been security cameras installed, none of this might have happened. Anyway, I was walking to the kitchen, and something made me turn and walk to the other side of the house, opposite to the side that the kitchen is on. I don't know why I did that, but I'm glad I did, because what I saw next is the entire reason I'm sending you this email. I saw a dog's head poking up over the top of our 9-foot-tall picket fence. I tried to remember what was on the other side of that fence, which the dog might be standing on to appear so tall, but there shouldn't have been anything there. The other thing was, the dog head was staring over the fence and down, looking right at the door opening handle. It had somehow discovered the hidden gate. That was one smart doggy. I went and got my wife, then ran back to watch the thing longer. She got there in time to see much of the rest of this, or enough of the rest of it, that she knew I wasn't making it up. The dog didn't just have its head over the fence now. It had its head, one shoulder, and a front arm of the thing on our side of the fence, and it was desperately reaching down, trying to get at the lever to open the gate. You could tell by the pained expression on the animal's face that it was straining itself to its limits to reach that lever. My wife had become very agitated. "That's not a dog," she said to me. I laughed. Of course it was a dog. What else could it be? The dog withdrew, and I figured the evening's entertainment was over. I was about to walk away when I heard my wife gasp. I looked back to see the dog, once again, leaning its head over the fence, its long arm now back as well. This time, though, in the dog's paw was a long stick. It was holding the stick the way a human would hold it. "The thing has a thumb," my wife muttered zombie-like. "It has a thumb. It's not a dog. It's a monster." I shuddered uncontrollably as I looked back at that thing. She was right. It had a hand. It had an arm. It did not have a dog's front leg. It had a human, or I guess ape-like, arm. And yet, it was a dog. It had the head of a dog. And it was using that stick to open my gate. It was going to get inside, and it was going to come for me and my wife. What was it going to do? I had to do something. So, what was it going to be? I heard my wife on the phone to the police telling them that she was watching a prowler trying to open her gate. Someone was there in around 3 minutes, and the creature left just before the police arrived. They told us that they saw dog prints, and it was probably just a large stray that we mistook for a person. They said that the shadows can be like that, and I acted like they were imparting great wisdom to me. They urged us to install a security camera or a burglar alarm or a motion-activated light or some other such mechanism to deter both human and canine prowlers. I doubt the creature will ever return since we're taking security precautions now, but how about that for a weird twist? We went to the authorities to report a Dogman sighting. Not wanting to get thought of as crazy, we said we saw an ordinary man. The authorities examined the scene and came back to insist to us that what we saw was most definitely a large canine, which is what we were afraid to tell them in the first place. Needless to say, I'm 100% certain about what I saw, and I feel like experts have examined the evidence and told me that when they had no idea that was how I already felt about it. What I saw, what we saw, may end up meaning nothing. Or it might be very significant. And that's because I saw Dogman using a tool. We've got 2 all-new stories about Dogman invading the rich parts of town where the well-heeled have gone to try to escape the virus. Which is worse, risking the illness in the cities or risking the Dogman out in the country? We'll check out these news stories before you decide. This episode's executive producer is our most recent one. I'm speaking about the king of cool, Bradley Poole. If you don't like Bradley, you're a fool. No, seriously, Mr. Poole's kind and generous contributions pay for us to stay on the air, for others of you to get to watch for free. I can't thank him and the others like him enough, and I hope you guys all appreciate how cool is Mr. Bradley Poole. Thank you again, BP. And if any of the rest of you would like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like Bradley Poole, the king of cool, simply join our relatively affordable paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Then you, like Bradley, will gain access to over 7 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories far too violent or something for us to run on this channel. And now for what Mr. Poole's hard-spent dollars are going toward, our next allegedly true viewer-submitted Dogman story, adapted by me, your old pal Bigfoot. These next 2 tales are from different parts of the country, but both have similar themes. In both cases, the stories are about Dogman apparently invading certain rich communities located out in the boondocks. People wanted to get away because of the current crisis, and it seems they're walking into an upright walking canid migration. Or possibly the Dogmen are just coming around because they smell all the food that the humans have. Or maybe they smell all the food that the humans are. Such as in this story called The Dogman in the Lake. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was visiting my well-off parents when the virus thing came down, and they talked me into staying with them rather than returning to the city where I live with my girlfriend. Besides missing my girl, I also regret my decision because it ended up with me almost getting drowned by the Dogman in the lake. My family's house has part of a lake as its backyard. The lake is shared by I think 6 or 8 other houses, I don't really care. They moved into it the second time they had a second wedding. It was mainly about them pretending they really weren't going to fight anymore this time, and also about them adopting some kid from another planet or something, because I had gotten too old to be cute any longer. I was having a tough time of it in high school, and so my parents' response was to buy a new mansion on a lake, pretend to get married all over again, and adopt some fashionable new brat. I was lucky they stopped liking me though, because otherwise I would have been completely spoiled. At least this way I had some extremely slight hardship in my life to learn to cope with. I became the loner in the family, looking to find the spot of the mansion that was the quietest, where I could be alone to concentrate or to meditate. My father had bought an antique houseboat and docked it at our little pier behind our house, but then he forgot about it. I took it over and cleaned it up, then would spend a lot of time there, alone, in the center of the lake. If other families seemed to want to be on the water that day, I could clear out, but the lake was seldom used in those years, and I largely had the center of it to myself. I took to anchoring it right in the center and then falling asleep staring up at the trillions and quadrillions of stars. Just so many stars. How did the ancients keep track of them? I don't feel like I could redraw any of them correctly, and yet they were able to make mathematical calculations based on their observations of the stars so long ago that we can't even really explain it. If you've never fallen asleep staring at the stars, be careful. It's quite a trippy ride. So, I've been staying on the houseboat again during this crisis thing, this time using social distancing as my excuse to avoid everyone. I'm on my computer half the day, and either my phone or some other device the rest of the time, and my girlfriend in the city always is too. She sends me pictures and videos of our apartment, our empty street, our cute cat who's getting big while I'm out here in a houseboat. I miss them very badly, and I'm starting to think of a plan to get back from here into the city and back to my real family. But To be 100% completely honest, I have to admit that my main motivator to want to get out of here is not loneliness or missing my loved ones. Let's get real. My chief reason to want to escape this place is the Dogman. One night, I was sleeping in my sleeping bag on the deck of the boat when I started dreaming that someone was trying to climb up onto it. The boat is small enough that I could feel the weight of the guy tipping it a bit in his direction. I could hear the water dripping off of him. It sounded like a big guy. Thinking about it brought me out of my dream, and I opened my eyes to see the single most horrific thing anyone might ever see. It was a monster man, dripping wet, climbing out of the lake and into the boat. It had big ears, almost as large proportionally as a bat's ears. It had a long snout like a jackal, and its eyes were lit up like bright yellow robot eyes, glowing from inside. I screamed and ran. At first, I just ran away, and then I ran toward where we keep the flare gun. The dog-headed man climbed on board and screamed at me like a brain-damaged caveman. He shouted at me and came after me. The thing had no tail, but otherwise was very dog-like all over. Its legs even looked like dog's legs, or big tree trunk versions of dog's legs at least. I got to the flare gun, and I fired, aiming at the monster's face. I'm sorry, I was scared to death, and that is what I did. It didn't matter anyway, because I have terrible aim, and it flew over the dogman's head, whizzing past as he turned quickly to follow it off. Then he turned back and gave me the oddest look, as though he had misjudged me as some kind of pushover. He did this sideways fall that turned into a dive, and he re-entered the water as silently and elegantly as I've ever seen it done. Hardly any water splashed, and when I ran to the side, I couldn't see where he was swimming. He wasn't visible on the surface or immediately below it. I brought up the anchor, and I brought our boat back to dock. Then I ran inside like a scared little chicken. I didn't tell my parents what happened to me, but they know something spooked me out on the boat, and they keep asking me about it. You would think that after asking something 10 or 12 times, they would get the hint that someone doesn't want to answer them. I have spoken to them about the idea of me going home to the city, and they are dead set against it. They claim it isn't even legal for me to travel there now, and I don't understand enough about it to know if they're correct or not. I just know that I'm miserable, and I want to go home. I miss my girlfriend. I miss our cat, and I miss the city. But one thing I will never miss is the Dogman in the lake. At least in the city, there isn't any Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my wife and I were both very content in our 2-level Manhattan condominium until these people she likes to impress all took off for the country to avoid the plague. It was like they were all competing for who could spend the crisis in the most obscure area. I'm not even going to tell you where we went, but I looked it up, and it's more known for UFO and Dogman sightings than it is for comfort or amenities. We haven't seen a UFO yet, but the area has already lived up to some of the worst aspects of its reputation. I feel like I should call this story Green Acres co-starring Dogman. My wife and I both dislike the country intensely, but she can't stand to not keep up with the Joneses, or the Vanderbilts or the Rothschilds and so forth. I whine to her daily that we should just go home, and I know she agrees with me, but it's all about putting up a good front. We have to seem to have had the best or most interesting or most restful time at the place we escaped to, like it's a competition. On other days, The competition can be about how much we can pretend to be sacrificing and doing without, at least in photos she posts on the internet. I used to be on social media myself years ago, but my wife said I wasn't good at it, and now a team of teenagers who can't spell are the official public version of me. I checked, and it turns out I'm sad for the sick people, and I'm grateful to have such a lovely place to stay with my awesome, beautiful, and powerful wife. The public me never talks about Dogman. The private me never shuts up about him. I don't feel that this is something we should be allowing ourselves to tolerate. When you purchase or rent a property and the Dogman is living there, I'm sure there must be someone you can sue. It's not like you have to stay there and risk life and limb. That creature can finish you even faster than any illness. It's not something to be fooled around with. Why would anyone in their right mind stay in an area with a dangerous, possibly man-eating predator lurking around on the grounds? We don't have any weapons to defend ourselves from monsters here, but neither of us would know what to do with one if we had it. There are absolutely no servants or security at all. We are spending this period socially isolated in the extreme. I've never experienced such aloneness before. If it weren't for the cook to make us find meals and the chauffeur to go fetch stuff for me, I might have gone mad by now. I first saw the Dogman when I was actually physically outside in the backyard after dark. I would never do such a thing now. I can't even imagine what I was thinking going out there alone and defenseless. I didn't know that Dogman was really a thing back then, but I knew that grizzly bears were a thing. I knew they can charge and attack, and they can run very fast. I knew there were snakes and mountain lions, and some even say that Bigfoot is real, so I should have been more prepared. I was such a fool, such a dimwit. I felt as though just because my wife leased that land, that it meant I was protected and safe. This house is in the center of forest, for miles in every direction. There isn't anything that could walk out of that woods that should have surprised any reasonable adult. But when I came here, I was a man-child. I was a protected pet, a lapdog. I had never fended for myself, and I hadn't even thought for myself. So when I saw that Dogman, I cried like a baby. I soiled my panties, and I ran inside to Mama. My wife gets hard and cold when I talk about the Dogman. She hasn't seen it, and I know she doesn't want to see it. She wants to pretend it doesn't exist. If she had show business friends, she might play it up on her social media, try to get a film crew out here. My wife's aspirations, however, are in more legitimate society. The kinds of people who don't want to get chewed on by mythical werewolf-type chimeras. One time, I saw the monster outside a window, and I pointed it out to her, but she refused to even turn her head to see. Then she started talking about how her cousin was a psychiatrist, and he could get me committed for life, and then she could get our marriage annulled, and then I would have to pay for my own hospitalization, and I would be in debt for so long that I would of a necessity be homeless for years until it was paid off. I asked her to stop tormenting me, but she continued with a graphic description of how I would be finished in under 3 days if I tried to live on the streets. She accentuated how weak she wanted me to think I was. She thinks that just because she wins all the time, that means I agree with her. Sooner or later, I will get my chance to show her what my opinion is. And when that chance presents itself, I will take it. Everything in her life is fake and phony. Everything is for show, it's for attention, it's for applause, or it's for virtue or victimhood points. Even when a life-threatening situation presents itself in the form of an actual feral and hostile Dogman patrolling our grounds, behaving disagreeably. And disagreeable he most certainly is. What is a Dogman, you may be asking? If you are, I applaud you for not knowing, I applaud you for staying in the cities. Don't ever leave there, because out here, we have trees, we have flying and crawling insects everywhere, and we have the foul beast known as Dogman. This is an upright walking canine, and yet it also is not. It walks upright like a man, but the chest and front legs of the dog are very different from what those of a dog generally look like. This guy looks like a man when you see his chest area. A hairy, furry, caveman sort of a guy. He's really buff, extremely ripped, but also with unruly and disgusting hair shooting out from unfortunate places in unsightly directions. I would say it was gray. All sorts of gray, including darker and warmer shades. It had light streaks of fur here and there throughout, reminding me of the Bride of Frankenstein's hairstyle in the old 1930s movie. The arms of the creature remind me of Beast from the X-Men comic books. Fur-covered and heavily muscled, they ended in clawed hands and looked deadly to get near. I have this idea in my head that there is poison on his claws, and I don't know why I feel that. I can't find anything about poisoned claws in Dogman or werewolf literature. I guess it doesn't matter if they are. If that thing gets close enough to hurt me with those claws, then I'd probably be a goner either way. So what happened was, I was watching the woods one night in the backyard. I guess I was strolling or wandering around the grassy lawn and looking at the trees absent-mindedly. In the darkness, I could see something was in the forest. I could make out the eye shine. It was quite a ways off the ground, so I felt it had to be something in a tree. I began wandering, slowly, toward it, to try to get a better look. That was when it burst loudly out of the trees, barking furiously and charging directly for me. I remember that moment, and probably always will. It was like someone started blasting trumpets and bagpipes in my ears along with overmodulated, too loud and distorted electric guitar. I was never so shocked in my life. I remember feeling embarrassed, not wanting this to be the way I go. I was going to be one of the characters done away with in the beginning of the horror flick. I wasn't the star of the show. I had always seen myself as. I was a red shirt from the real original Star Trek. I was the extra that the monster finishes off so that the audience can see how horrible and violent he is. All of my life. All of the times I took myself so seriously. And it was going to end this way, with me as a prop in a gross scene in a low-budget B-movie, essentially. It was tacky. It was gauche. I wanted to believe it was beneath me, and yet it was happening to me. I never ran so hard. I was determined not to let it end this way. My wife calls me weak, but I had nothing to lose in that moment, and I allowed myself to be strong. I made it back near the house, then threw lawn furniture in the creature's way, just like a badass in a real B-movie might have done. I made it back inside, but once I saw my wife, I collapsed into pathetic tears. It was a horrifying experience. It just barely missed being the most horrifying kind of experience. And I think you can understand why I think it's imperative that we leave this place immediately. Besides the 2 times I saw him with my own eyes, we both hear him in the night. He hits into the house. He howls in the neighborhood. Sometimes we hear him barking at something off in the woods. My wife insists it's just a dog or a coyote, but she must know by now that I'm telling her the truth. She says I just want to leave because I'm weak. If she wants to stay, then she's weak in the head. She tells me I shouldn't be outside anyway because of social distancing, but there are no humans within miles of here. I feel I'm trapped inside this house because if I go outside, if either of us go outside, We risk encountering something that we might not survive meeting. We risk running face to face into the Dogman. It's hard for me to know what to do. I can't just have the chauffeur drive me away because I would be leaving my wife here absolutely alone. Well, alone with the cook anyway, it doesn't seem right. I'm not sure how to get my wife to see the danger all around us, or to take it seriously. She says, as long as we only go out in the day, nothing will happen. I can't be certain of that, and I don't see why we should take the gamble. I just don't see the value in posting internet photos of the place, and how that can be more important than our own safety. But almost anything I can think of to do would get my wife quite angry at me and cause her to feel disrespected. Obviously, that would accomplish nothing good. I'm becoming a wreck, and I'm out of ideas as to what I should do. If any of you can give me a little perspective as to what you think might be a good thing to do, please feel free to tell me about it. All I can think of is how badly I want to go back to the city. I would wear a mask and gloves, I'd be safe, I'd keep 6 feet away from people, I'd be good. No matter how many advantages my wife can claim this house represents, I would still choose the city over here 10 times out of 10. Why? Because, at least in the city, there isn't any Dogman. I hope this video finds you in good health, or at least in good spirits. If not, then please allow us to distract you from your troubles for the next 20 minutes or so. We've got 3 scary Dogman stories for you. The savage dog monkey, the shepherd of the Dogmen, and our first story, in which an eyewitness describes being chased on a rural highway by the Dogman. But first, please allow me to introduce our newest executive producer. He just joined us last night. I'm speaking, of course, about Kyle Montez. Thank you, Kyle. We are really grateful to you for your help, especially right now. We couldn't do what we do without generous people like Kyle, and we appreciate him greatly. If you'd like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like Kyle Montez, just join our affordable paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You'll get links to hours and hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories just for joining, plus a brand new uncensored scary story each Sunday, too wild for us to ever tell you here on the main channel. If you can't afford anything like that right now, we understand. Liking, leaving a nice comment, sharing the video with your friends, all of these things help the channel a lot as well. And now, let's get to that first story I was telling you about. It's a story about a guy who's had a hard night. You'll be able to tell that from the title. But it's one of those cases where, as bad as it turned out, it could have been so much worse. And the title of this allegedly true tale is Dogman got me arrested for speeding. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story that happened to me many years ago when I was working down south as a salesman. I'm from up north, and I have no talent in sales, so I have no explanation for you about what I was doing or where I was doing it. All I know is that I was driving from one southern city to another one in pursuit of this livelihood I did not in any way understand. I had mentally filed this story away in embarrassment. I usually try not to think about that period of my life, but when I was thinking about the monster that chased me that night, I realized it might very well have been a Dogman. This happened in the late 1980s, and I had not yet heard of Dogman, as far as I can remember. I probably first heard of him in the 1990s, but I never connected Dogman with what had stalked and hunted me on that night so many years back. I'll just describe what's left of my memories of the evening, as well as I still can, and you please allow that I might be misremembering parts of it after all this time. I never really placed much positive importance on the event. It cost me money, made me later than I already had been, and was embarrassing to have to admit to my parents. Let's start there with my parents. Mom and Dad did not believe in monsters. I made the mistake of confiding in them what had actually happened while I was still feeling emotional about it, and it led to a falling out with my father that never really got fixed. My mother was more open to continuing her relationship with me, but her contempt for me was in every glance, gesture, and utterance. She told me that anyone else would have just admitted that they had been caught speeding. They would apologize and try never to do it again. But when I got caught speeding, I blamed the Dogman. This, she told me with a sad, trembling voice, is the kind of thing you always do. It's why your father and I are always so disappointed in you. I just stopped trying to know either of them after a while. They left everything to my sister and her lawyer husband, who didn't need a dime of it. I have nothing to complain about. They didn't owe me anything. But the real ending between me and my parents was finally triggered by the Dogman. If it hadn't been him, it might have been something else. I can't remember a time when my parents weren't impatient with me, and yet they got along so well with every other relative. I never felt as though I were really in that family. I would ask them if I was adopted, and they would punish me for asking. When the punishment was over, I would ask them again. So I would have done something eventually that they could have made a big deal out of and condemned me forever over. I don't really blame the Dogman for that. It is, however, true that my Dogman experience ended my relationships with all of my immediate family. I had never been anyone's favorite, but I had a family. They were a family that didn't like or respect me, that was ashamed of me no matter what I did, but they were a family. Then, one morning, I woke up to find that I was the crazy guy with no family who thinks Dogman is chasing him. It happened almost overnight. So, I was driving through Georgia, and I apologize if there are people from there listening. I think it's a lovely state, and I have nothing against it. I also have nothing against any of the police or highway patrol officers there now, or back in the 80s when this happened. I just had a bad night, and I'm not trying to disparage anyone who was doing their duty on that evening. I was not speeding when this situation began, but I was going the limit because I was late, and I was concerned about losing my job. I had to meet with someone who would decide my future with the company, and I was very stressed out about the meeting. At that age, I didn't yet know how to put things in perspective, so I was sweaty and jittery and panicky and feeling guilty about being so late. When the Dogman walked out in front of my car, like the Bigfoot in the Patterson film, or like Paul McCartney on the cover of Abbey Road, I screamed like a baby girl, and I hit the brakes. I skidded all over the road trying not to hit that Dogman, and in fact, I managed to do just that. But I had spun out, and I was now idling in the dirt off the road, facing in the wrong direction. I looked around at where I was off the road in the trees, and I remembered the word jungle popped into my head. I don't mean that there were palm trees and jaguars, I just mean the vegetation was densely overgrown. Besides that road, there was thick vegetation. Even the vegetation had vegetation on it. Vines grew on trees which grew out of dead trees, and then, there, in the middle of the road, looking at me, was the strange caveman who had caused me to spin out. He was staring at me. I was looking back at him, and I remember thinking, that caveman sure looks like a dog. I looked at his body again, and it was shaggy as though he were wearing an animal skin wrapped around him. Upon closer inspection, I saw that some of the fur was long, some of it was short, and some of it just seemed to be missing. Possibly, the creature had some kind of malady like mange. I wondered, was mange something I could catch from contact with that thing? I rolled up all my windows, and I noticed the mangy monster walking toward me, on its hind legs like a man, yet appearing to have a dog-like face. I put the car in drive and turned out of the dirt back onto the road. I passed by the dog-headed mange man, and he slapped his hands on the car as I passed. They sounded like palms hitting the metal. They did not sound like dog paws or bear claws. I drove away, freaked out, but mostly afraid that I might get mange. I didn't really understand how dangerous that thing was that I was driving away from. And then, in the rearview mirror, I saw that the dog-headed creature was still there, still as large as he had been before. Upon closer inspection, I saw that he was running after me on his hind legs, the way a human would, but much faster. Fear shot through me as though I had been impaled on an icicle. I was in danger. That thing wasn't done with me yet, at least not in its mind. That thing had a mind, something I hadn't really stopped to consider. I had allowed it to decide what was going to happen to me, and it had decided to prolong this encounter. I hit the gas and watched the Dogman drop to all fours and speed up, continuing to pace me until I got myself up over the legal speed limit. I saw the Dogman recede into my past, but I was absolutely panicked, and I wanted to put more distance between me and it. I was weeping tears of horror and wishing I could crawl into my mother's arms. I had taken the man test, and I had failed. And that is when I heard the police siren. I panicked, and I hit the gas by accident instead of my brakes. I say by accident, and it's true it was at first. But then, I really wished I could escape that cop. I foolishly tested the top speed of my vehicle. I don't remember the exact number I achieved, but I do remember that the cops had no trouble equaling it and urging me to please pull over. I wept to them about the Dogman, and they didn't even want to hear it. I bet it's a speed trap, and they cut Dogman in on a share. They set bail for some amount 2 or 3 times what it was worth back then. My parents refused to pay it, and I spent my time until the trial in jail. I would like to say that was the lowest point in my life. But I was married for 3 years in the early 2000s. I didn't see any Dogmen when I was married, though, so I'm not even going to get into that. I lost that job, but maybe it was for the best. I had to completely start my entire life over by myself, alone from scratch, because Dogman got me arrested for speeding. The savage dog monkey. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story to tell you about a kind of dogman that we had outside our town when I was in high school back in the early 1960s. This was a small town in the middle of New Jersey on the eastern side. There's a state park not all that far from Asbury Park that I went to when I was that age. In that park, I ran into the greatest horror I would ever encounter. I ran into the savage dog monkey. I was hiking alone, something I would not recommend that anyone ever do, and I was having a fine time of it. I had never breathed air that fresh before, and I felt like my life had just begun in earnest for the first time ever. I breathed deeply, enjoying every second, until one of my breaths was so foul, so rotten and distasteful smelling that I immediately found myself quite nauseous. I turned to see it, but it was already upon me. I fell backwards, screaming in horror as over me there landed a hideous-looking canine monkey man. Its face was that of a dog, but it had chimpanzee fur and facial expressions. It barked in my face and growled and screeched and bore its teeth inches from my eyes. It huffed and puffed, and its nasty breath blew my face in, making me feel like I was going to pass out and be unable to defend myself. Not that I was defending myself very well while awake. I lay on my back, swinging my fists toward the thing, but somehow I never connected to anything. I rolled over to try to get up, and the dog face was barking at me, snapping at me, forcing me back in the other direction. When I would try to regain my footing in the opposite direction, somehow the insanely fast dog thing was there too, up in my face, snapping at my nose, hurting my ears with his incredibly loud barking. It was sensory overload, topped with the cherry of abject fear. I was certain that I was not only about to get torn apart, I was certain it was actually already happening. I don't remember how I got up, but I remember running, the dog after me, snapping sometimes at my behind and other times breathing down my neck, depending on whether it was running bipedally or quadrupedally at that particular moment. It kept going back and forth between the two, apparently based on the terrain, and whichever would be easier for it. The man thing was so like a dog, and yet the way it spun around some trees while running after me reminded me of the way monkeys swing around in trees. It was like some kind of a devil monkey. I was never so scared in my life because any direction I turned in, it seemed the thing would be there, barking at me. I saw a mother and her kids, and I ran toward them, crying. They saw me, and they screamed and ran away. That's how bad I must have looked. But for whatever reason, the dogman had stopped following me when I ran into those other humans. I made my way home to safety, weeping on the bus home, and took a shower. I inspected myself for wounds that I wanted to clean immediately. I was concerned that the beast might have had venom or disease, and I wanted to make sure that no cuts got infected. But there were no cuts. None at all. I had a black and blue on my leg that could have been from the forest, I don't know. The creature that had inflicted the most terrifying experience on me that I had ever lived through had not actually caused even the slightest injury to my person. I was convinced I was under an attack that I would not survive, but I had absolutely no evidence that anything of the kind had taken place. It was pretty baffling to me. I remember telling this kid at school who was a great young athlete about what happened to me, and he believed me. Half the kids in school didn't believe me and half did, but the half that did all had different theories about what it was that I had encountered. None of them thought it was the Dogman, since we didn't know what the Dogman was back then. One kid thought it was a werewolf, but the other kids had more down-to-earth explanations, such as a dog and a monkey got married, or a dog and a monkey got caught in a nuclear explosion and turned into one monster together. The athlete was the only one of my classmates that put his money where his mouth was. He got back to me a month later and told me he had actually gone hiking on that same trail as me at the same time of evening, and I could tell by his alarmed demeanor that he was not lying or exaggerating when he told me of his very similar experience to mine. He described swinging blow after blow at the monster, none of them landing. He told me what I already knew. The dog-headed man had ape-like agility and could move its head and neck and body back, forward, and all around to avoid any blow that a mere human could throw at it. This was not a fight that a man could win. The athlete told me that he felt as though he had barely escaped the monster with his life, and yet later discovered that just as he had never laid a fist on the creature, it had never laid a claw on him. Neither of them had managed to land a blow on the other. The athletic student looked extremely unnerved. As he told me, he wasn't even sure that the event actually took place. He told me that the whole thing made him feel crazy, and he asked me to never speak to him about it ever again. Sometimes I think the dog monkey may be nature's hoaxer, all sound and fury, signifying nothing. Perhaps it is, or was, a creature that feeds off fear, or uses it as a defense. For something that seemed so easy for two different teenagers to find back in 1960 or 61, it sure has seemed to become rare since. Beyond rare, let's call it invisible, and inexplicable. I still get the heebie-jeebies when I walk or drive past woods or parks in New Jersey that remind me of the one in which I once saw. The savage dog monkey. The shepherd of the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I had a dream for years that I hated getting. It really creeped me out and didn't seem to make any sense. More recently, I had the horrific experience of witnessing a dogman, and I feel as though I somehow now understand what the point of the nightmare dream was in the first place. Now, when this dream first started, or at least when I first started remembering it, I had just gotten heavily into Dungeons and Dragons. That's kind of what I wrote the dream off as, something inspired by D&D. It continued after I stopped playing the game though, and lasted through my adult life. I would typically get this dream every 3 or 4 months, and it always went basically the same way. I would be having a normal dream. It might be a good dream sometimes, or a nightmare other times, but then I would notice a man who was very tall. He would always be dressed in old and tattered robes of various dark gray colors, and he was surrounded by tall black wolves. No matter how far away they are when I first see them, I inevitably get caught up inside the pack of wolves, and they are inevitably far taller up close than they looked off in the distance. Soon, they're all up to my neck, and they're growling at me, bumping into me, treating me in a rough and rude fashion. I feel like someone is looking at me, and I tilt my head up to see the huge man in the center of the wolves. He is the shepherd of the Dogman, that's what I call him. He always asks me the same question. Do you see me? And I always answer the same way. Yes. And then he always says the same terrible thing. The thing that wakes me up in horror, sweating, convinced that it was real. He says to me, if you see me, then run. I don't know what happens after that, but I know it's the most horrible thing possible. It might be worse than that if it could be. It's something so terrifying that you could be dead and buried and still be afraid of it. I don't know what that means, but I know that's how I would feel every single time I would wake from that dream. So it came to be around 5 years ago that I was hiking and camping in Wisconsin in Devil's Lake State Park. One night, in the middle of the darkness, I was awakened, and I didn't know by what. I didn't have to relieve myself, and I didn't hear any sound or see any light outside. I got out of my tent and looked down a ways toward the trees, and I swear I thought I could see some people milling about. They seemed to be approaching, and as they got closer, I could see them a little more clearly. When they were still about 500 or 600 feet away, the moon was lighting them up clearly enough that I was able to see a pack of ridiculously large black dogs, all milling about and encircling a tall figure who appeared to be wearing a hairy garment of some kind. I stared at this gentleman until I finally understood that there was nothing gentle about him, and that was no man. Standing in the center of the dogs was another dog. It was not a man. It was an upright walking dog, leading an entire pack of other black dogs the same size as he was. I saw another of the canines rise to its hind legs, and I grabbed some of my more important stuff like my water bottle and rammed them into my backpack. Then I took off, hiking in the dark, which is something I would never suggest anyone do. I had my GPS on my phone and I just made it out through improvisation. All I mainly cared about was staying ahead of that dogman leading his dogman flock. I had the dream enough times to know that the one in the center was the shepherd. He was the shepherd of the dogmen. And if you see the shepherd of the dogmen, you run. Don't forget, still to come in the show, we've got Madeline Starr to present some creepy springtime dogman stories. But first, this. Today we've got some really good news stories for you, but before we get started, I'd like to say that today's executive producer is one of our more recent members, Karen Garner. Karen, you garner our praise with your steadfast loyalty and support of the show above and beyond the call of duty. Seriously, we couldn't do this show without the generous support of kind and wonderful people like Karen Garner. If you would like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like Karen Garner, simply join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Once I see that you've joined, I will send you an email containing links to over 7 hours of uncensored, secret, scary Dogman stories unavailable anyplace else on the planet. Plus, we do a new secret story every Sunday, and you know that you're helping to support working artists. And now, to today's all-new Dogman stories. There is one coming up in which someone claims to have had an experience which allowed them to see as a dogman sees. But first, we have a recent story about a neighborhood of people having conversations with each other at socially distant 6-foot distances. But one figure who fails to observe social distancing is the work-at-home Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I live in a suburban community that I don't want to name for a long list of reasons. We are not very hard hit by the current crisis, as most of us are able to work from home and continue to collect paychecks. There have been very few cases of the virus in our state, and many of us are anxious to get back to normal. Not my wife, or my best friend's wife either. They really seem to enjoy not taking a shower or brushing their teeth before work each morning. They don't comb their hair or use antiperspirant either. I understand the idea that you don't have to go downtown and work in an office, but that doesn't mean you have to revert to Stone Age barbarism. I am anxious for those most affected by this horrible worldwide situation, and I want it over quickly for the sake of those poor individuals and their families. But I have to admit, I also am praying for it to end, just so that my wife might once again feel the need to shave her armpits. Call me an ist or a phobe, I don't even care. I miss my old wife, the one that washed her hair and took baths. I was outside bringing in the garbage cans the other morning when our neighbor Melvin came over to talk and say hi. I cautioned him to stand 6 feet away while we spoke, which he ignored. Getting closer, he began whispering to me about the lady who lived on the other side of him, the new neighbor. She was fairly recently divorced, and Melvin was convinced that she was on the make. He told me tales of how she allegedly flirted with him, and he's a married man. I still hadn't met the new lady on the block, but I was certain that ugly old Mel was lying about her being attracted to him. I decided to change the subject and ask Melvin about his wife. Was she holding up well during the lockdown? Mel's face soured, and he stared at the ground, looking like a pouting 10-year-old for a few seconds before answering. "She's okay," he said, moping. Then he stared off in the distance, trying to look like Clint Eastwood. "She never changes out of her pajamas anymore," he hissed, saying each word as though it had the weight and deep meaning of a passage from ancient scripture, only instead of describing the magnificence or wonder of heaven, this scripture was describing a curse which had been placed upon the reader of the scroll. Melvin and I both stared down for a while, sighing and pitying ourselves. We had nothing else to say to each other, but still we lingered for a while longer. At least, being with Melvin was something different than being inside with my wife. "If your wife always wore pajamas when you first met her?" I began to ask Melvin a question. Now it was his turn to change the subject. "So that's what I was telling you about," he said. "Linda still gets dressed up to go to work every day, even though she works from home, same as the rest of us." I had to think for a while. Linda? I don't know any Linda. I opened my mouth to ask who Linda was, and Melvin reminded me. "Our new neighbor." Mel went on and on and on about all the wonderful virtues of our block's new addition. He got me walking and talking with him, heading down the block toward her home. She gave him a muffin she baked herself, he told me. She smelled of perfumed soaps, he told me. Her nice skirts and dresses revealed that she shaved her legs, like someone from 2019 or before. She's a throwback to when humanity still was allowed to go outside for frivolous reasons, Melvin told me. It's clear he's crazy about this divorced woman. She'd become a fantasy figure to the guy. I was laughing at him and feeling sorry for him. Nothing good could come out of having the hots for a divorcee when you're still married yourself. The property that the lady had moved on to was the largest in our neighborhood. You could almost say that she and Melvin had a neighborhood of their own, as Mel's house was by far the closest to hers in any direction. We could all see her mansion, and she could see our humble homes, because she was situated up on a hill toward the center of her land. Her mailbox, though, was located down very close to Mel's property, though, and he freely admitted to me that he would go to collect his mail when he could see her coming down her path to her mailbox. It was about the right time, and he wanted me to meet this lady. When I saw her coming from the distance, I saw that she was every bit the vision that she had been described as. It was like watching some glamorous Hollywood starlet from the mid-20th century approaching. Every move she made spelled out class and society, but also an unmaskable, charismatic, and animal charm. I felt ashamed of how slovenly I looked in my tattered bathrobe. I told Mel I would take a rain check for the next morning, and I ran back home. The next day, I appeared on time to check mail in one of my designer business casual ensembles that my wife had chosen for me to wear to important, yet not formal, business affairs. Mel smirked when he saw me. I noticed he was carrying a box under his arm. He showed it to me, and it had the Lady Linda's name and address on it. I asked him how he had gotten a hold of it. He told me he bribed the UPS driver to send her packages his way. It gave Mel an appearance of being a white knight to bring them to her, or at least he felt it did. On this day, as the stunning lady approached us, I actually grew nervous. Once she arrived, I felt that strange euphoria that teenage boys feel when they think they've fallen in love. I already had a bad crush on this lady before she even said hello and was introduced to me. I could no longer mock Melvin. I had become as powerless to resist her as he had, and things could only go downhill from there. Suffice to say that I was charmed smitten, bitten. I felt as though I were walking on air when I returned inside. Until my wife let me have it, that is. She demanded to know why I had used my expensive aftershave and why I had dressed like a human. She knew it had to have something to do with a woman. She just needed to figure out which woman. We argued all day, and the next day, too. I let her go out and get the mail that day. I didn't want to get in any more trouble. But the second or third night after meeting the lovely Lady Linda, the doorbell rang when my wife was taking a bath upstairs. I checked it, and it was a package delivery. That was odd because it was after dark and we usually get deliveries in the morning. I read the address, and it turned out to actually belong to our neighbor, Linda. I was about to set it aside to deal with in the morning when my wife called out something rude from upstairs to me. I don't remember what it was. It wasn't all that bad in and of itself. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back, that's all. I grabbed Linda's package, checked to see that I looked okay in the mirror, and I set off for her house. I hadn't realized that there were no street lights on Linda's block. In fact, they seemed to end after Melvin's place. I never had a reason to walk or drive down in this direction before, at least not at night. It was pretty creepy. I was beginning to regret that I was doing what I was doing. I thought about going home, but I was already halfway there. I looked at the box, and it seemed to be computer equipment. Maybe it was something that was vital to her business. Maybe it was extremely important that I finish this delivery. I hemmed, and I hawed, and as I did so, I heard the strangest kind of sound. I wasn't even sure what it was at first. Was it something rubbing against something else? Was it someone moaning? Was it a ghost? Was it Bigfoot? The sound shifted to a kind of snarling and whining, and I understood that I was in the presence of an agitated, annoyed animal of some sort. My initial thought was that I was about to be pounced on by a mountain lion, and I ducked down, looking around above me on tree branches and the fence I was walking past. I spun around and found nothing lurking on any ledge. Instead, I found something just standing there, staring at me. On the other side of the fence, a few feet from the mailbox and gate to Linda's property, there stood something that looked like a hairy devil man. It had goat legs bent backward, a hairy, mangy, hideous-looking body, and the head of some kind of feral proto-canine. Like people will say they saw a walking German shepherd or a walking this or that, what I saw was not like a modern dog. It had teeth too thick and too long to be modern. It had teeth the size of your fist. It had a mouth too large to fit in its head, and it looked like it could bite you in two. It was a dogman, or a werewolf, or a dog mixed with a demon, or something else absolutely horrible like that. I just ran home. I ran past Melvin's place, and I ran home, and I collapsed in a crying fit once I got inside. I wouldn't go get the mail if I saw Mel out there or if I saw Linda, not for days afterward. I hadn't spoken to either of them in all that time. Yesterday, Friday, as I typed this, I went to get the mail out of our mailbox, and both Linda and Mel ambushed me. They had been staking me out, wanting to get to talk to me. Linda thanked me for bringing her the computer item that she had been waiting for in the mail. I said fine, sure, no problem. Then I went back inside and it hit me. I had never delivered that box to Linda. I guess I must have dropped it when I saw the Dogman. I don't even remember what I did with it. That's how scared I was of the dog-headed monster creature. So why did Linda thank me for delivering the computer equipment which I couldn't possibly have delivered? There's something weird about our new divorcee neighbor. I'm gonna do my best to steer clear of her. Let Melvin destroy his marriage over a charming lady if he wants to. It's not worth it to me. The more I think about it, the more I grow curious. And the more curious I grow, the deeper I sink into trouble with my wife and just in general. I think I need to keep my nose firmly in my own business and out of anyone else's. And I have to keep my fingers crossed that I never again encounter the work-at-home Dogman I saw through Dogman's eyes. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I believe I have been granted awareness of aspects of the Dogman situation in North America, and I would like to share this information with all of you. I will be honest as to where the data was received from. I urge you to take it all with a grain of salt, but please keep your minds open to the possibilities hinted at in my presentation. I am a regular person, like anyone watching this show. I have recently had a vision in which I was granted knowledge that I was asked to pass on. Initially, I felt it was only a dream. I was embarrassed to tell anyone about it, but bad things started to happen to me. Unlucky things. I was filled with guilt, because in my dream, I had promised this old man that I would repeat what he had said to all of you. The words he spoke seemed very wise when I was inside the dream, but as I was writing it into my diary in real life the next morning, it was already losing much of its apparent depth and importance. Yet, the bad luck continued. I began having equipment malfunction in strange ways, and I continually lost my keys even though each time I was certain where I had left them. Each time one of these things would happen, I would feel sure that it had to do with my dream, and I would feel guilty all over again. I went to the real-life place that I had seen in my dream, and I asked for a sign. It was a forested area off of the road not too far from my home. I had always had a fascination with this little plot of land. It had a roadside sign on it when I was a kid that had a special grip on me. I guess because it was on ground level, unlike most roadside signs which are up way high. It had bright lights on its bottom, pointing up to illuminate the sign above it. Even when I was a kid, the sign looked antique, and homey, and sweet, and innocent, and like something from a 1940s or 1950s movie. But it also looked like show business. It was large and expensively printed and all glamorous in Hollywood or Madison Avenue. And yet even as a kid, I could walk up and touch it, so I had a personal liking for it. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, it was still standing, but nobody was paying to put signs up on it anymore. I guess there probably wasn't enough traffic on that old 2-lane road to justify the expense and trouble any longer. It was covered in graffiti and became a hangout area. My friends and I would party there for a while until the local law enforcement encouraged us to cease and desist. We would still go back to the place in smaller groups and hang out behind the old sign. We had absolute privacy there, since the sign behind us blocked any view of us from the road. Even leaning against the back of the sign, you were already deep in the forest over there. It was like crawling with bugs and spiders and worms, and everything smelled like the forest. Like it smelled wet, even on dry nights, at least to me. I had so much history at that place, and yet this time, when I drove back there, all I saw was the version of it from my dream. That very intense, real-seeming dream that I felt guilty not telling anyone about. I didn't want anyone thinking I was crazy, and as a result, I myself am starting to think that I'm mad. There is no sign there now, not one that's visible anyway. In my dream, I saw the old man emerge from the sign even though there was no sign there. The energy of the sign remained present. That's the way I parsed it in my brain during the dream. The old man came, and he told me that I was in grave danger. I asked him in what way I might be harmed, and he told me there was a creature around 1.5 miles away who was going to come for me. He showed me the creature, and it was like a lion man, but with a dog-shaped head. Or I guess it was a canine that walked upright and also had what appeared to be a mane of longer hair on its head and upper shoulders. It was dark, though. The fur was dark and long and shaggy. I was going to ask the old man how the creature could know I was there if he was so far away, and I heard a bird cry far above me. Instantly, shockingly, I was inside that bird, and I was looking down at myself without any feeling of the passage of time, not even 1 microsecond. I was inside the vantage point of a very tall man, yet I was seeing from inside of the bird as well. I looked down at myself, and I was not me. I was covered in long, shaggy, dark fur. I felt strength in my arms and my legs and my tail. An awareness hit me that if I could see from the bird's eyes and from the dogman's eyes, they must be able to see through my eyes. I returned to looking through my own dream eyes, and I was once again talking to the old man. He was urging me, begging me, ordering me to tell everyone what I had seen, what I had learned. I felt honored to have been asked to shoulder such a burden, and I tearfully, emotionally promised that old man that I would tell the world. Then I woke up and I was like, people will laugh at me. So I went to that place in real life one night, and I parked my car, rolled down my window, and I looked around. I thought about getting out when a chill wind blew through the car, giving me a shiver and feeling like an omen. I decided to keep the engine idling so that I could peel out faster if a real-life old man popped out at me or something. I admit I was spooked, very frightened to be there. It felt every bit as creepy as I was hoping that it wouldn't. I asked the night for a sign. Was the dream real? Are Dogman actually remote viewers? Can they see through your eyes? Is that how they can evade capture 100% of the time without fail? Can you give me a sign, I asked the night, that this is something more than just a crazy dream? There was a noise of something moving through the bushes. I almost laughed. The forest was answering my mental question, but I wasn't sure yet what exactly it was telling me. What had made that noise? Was it a squirrel? A bear? An owl? I got excited, as I might be about to be communicated with by eternity itself. I hoped I would be up to the task of decoding the symbolism of what was about to take place. What actually happened next might be exaggerated in my mind. It might not have actually been as large as it seemed to me. But I can swear to you that what I saw sure seemed very large. And what I saw was a dog. It was not like any breed of dog I've ever seen. It had dark, shaggy fur and some kind of a mane around its shoulders, where the hair or fur grew out longer. It was not standing on its hind legs. It did not appear as a werewolf. It appeared as an immense dog. I forced myself not to scream, but I was unnaturally scared in that moment, and as I choked down my own shriek of fear, I saw my own face. I saw my own expression then, and this was the freakiest part. I saw my own eyes look back at me. I looked back into my own eyes. Now I did scream. I screamed, and I opened my eyes, and I shut them, and I screamed some more. The Dogman was looking at me, and I was him. I felt like I had reached the tipping point. I wasn't even sure which one of us was driving the car. Somehow, I managed to get home, but I have not felt completely normal again ever since. I don't mean I need to be hospitalized or anything. I just mean that I feel weird. Some people tell me that I need to pursue remote viewing, that I must have a natural talent for it, or none of this would have happened. That's fine for them, if they want to live their life inside a horror movie. I saw my own horrified face looking right back at me. I'm never going to be able to forget that waking nightmare. You would need to have it happen to you before you could understand why it made my brain twist into knots. I'll be okay. but I still feel more than a little crazy in my head. But now I've told you what that old man insisted I repeat. I've been honest. It's only my dream that I'm telling you about. I have no proof that what I say is true, and none of you should believe anyone that has no proof. But I discharged my responsibility. I told you my story, and I told you what the old man said. I think he spoke the truth, even if he was a figment of my imagination. I feel my paradigms have been permanently shifted, and that I will increasingly accept this as how reality actually functions. I might be wrong, though, and I might just be bonkers. I hope that I will continue to have enough mental agility to stay one step ahead of the insanity. The only thing that I can say with certainty is that my entire life changed after I saw through Dogman's eyes. You've been waiting for her, and now here she is, Madeline Starr, with some scary springtime Dogman stories.
Welcome to the Ides of April Dogman special starring me, Madeline Starr. We're here to try to cheer up your dreary April with the reminder that at least tax day got pushed back this year. Although I enjoyed our last special, I found it a little scary being out in the forest, alone. So this time I've invited Henry Lee Dogman to be my co-host.
Hi, Maddie. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Henry. Also, this is not a real forest, it's a green screen. Can you show him, Smokey? See? Please put a scarier background up this time. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Last time, in the real forest, I kept having this terrifying feral dogman creep up on me from behind. Here in the studio, at least, I know that can never...
Maddie? Madeline? Is she okay? Can someone get her smelling salts? Dude, you've got to stop scaring her like that. Well, let me take this moment to announce our newest executive producer, Robin May. Robin just joined the club and is our very first Robin of this spring. Thank you, Robin. We can't tell you how greatly we appreciate your help, especially right now with everything that's going on. We couldn't have done this special without your help. I'm going to check to see if Madeline's alright, and in the meantime, please you check out this very scary Dogman story. The Dogman of Spring Training. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a story for you from my youth. It involves baseball, young love, and perhaps most importantly, the Dogman. I hear you've been doing a lot of stories about Dogman during the recent lockdown period. My story is about the late 1970s in spring in Florida. That place and time was the opposite of a lockdown. It was a free-for-all. You can take that any way you would like, and it would probably be true back then. I was fairly innocent for the time. I had one girlfriend named Martha, and she had one boyfriend named me. We were both passionate about baseball, and the Detroit Tigers had spring training nearby. We went to several games that spring, and on the way back to our town, we would walk through a fairly notorious wooded area and get to hug and kiss for a while. We were always warned not to go in there because of the crime that was supposedly lurking inside. We never got mugged or bothered in there by humans, but I'm about to tell you about the time we got interrupted quite rudely by an actual, real-life, in-person, Florida Dogman. I've always loved baseball. I still do, and I miss it. I saw an ad for a baseball game and it made me want to buy it. I was looking into getting it and I saw that it doesn't work on my computer. I found out what it does work on, and I actually considered buying one of them just because I miss baseball that much right now. But there was a time when it was plentiful, and our athletic cups overrunneth with baseballs and hot dogs. In those days, the Tigers had a good club, and Martha and I were excitedly talking about them and how we thought they were going to fare that season in the American League when we entered the Forest of Doom, or the crime-ridden park. Nobody was around and it was dark in there. We got to making out right quick, as we were young, and we had a good sense of priorities back then. I suppose it was a bit rude of us to be doing what we were doing while leaning up against a tree in a park, but it was far ruder for the Dogman to pounce out on us the way he did, barking loudly and fiercely and causing Martha to scream bloody murder. People ran over to us telling us to shut the F up. They were mad because almost everyone in those trees that night was doing something they weren't supposed to. The last thing any of them wanted was someone screaming and drawing the attention of the ordinary world to this most extraordinary place. Some teenagers started laughing and pointing, thinking that it was funny to see two young lovers interrupted by a fiercely barking dog. Then, that dog reared up on its hind legs to stand far taller than I would have thought it were possible for a land mammal to stand. Absolute bedlam broke loose as everyone ran, screaming in every single direction. I saw people running face first into each other, and then continuing on after that. The Dogman was so freakishly large, so impossible to imagine, that we all forgot about sanity and asked our legs to take us to some place that wasn't there. Martha and I ran the entire rest of the way out of the forest, and when we got out, we both collapsed onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. People probably thought we were addicts or something. I'm sure we looked pathetic. We must have laid there for 10 or 15 minutes before we could get up and continue going home. That was the single freakiest thing I've ever had happen to me. I told all my friends, but they were not impressed. They told me it was a trick, but they couldn't tell me how the trick was done, or why someone would do a trick in the woods at night anyway. These days, with the modern magicians, I can actually imagine it might be possible that someone could pull off a trick like this one, but not back then. We never used that park again, even during the daytime. I've never heard any other stories about monsters in there, so maybe it was just a fluke kind of thing. For years, when we would talk about it, we would know what the other one meant when we would mention the spring training Dogman.
Oh, heavens. Did we introduce the first story yet?
Oh, sure, I got your back, Maddie, no biggie.
Sorry about that. I'm not usually so lightheaded.
That's okay, take your time.
Give me a second to focus my eyes on the teleprompter, and then I'll do the next...
Dude, I told you to stop doing that. No, I said don't sneak up behind her. Don't. It means do not. Look, my cousin here is a good guy, but he has trouble with stage directions. I'm going to try to explain this to him again, and while I'm doing that, please check out our second scary Dogman story of the episode. I'm allergic to the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when I get asked if I have allergies, I usually say no, but it's not actually completely a true statement. You see, I've discovered over the years that I actually have an allergy to the Dogman. When I was 13 or 14, I stayed with my great Aunt Ginny as my parents spent a lot of money trying to destroy each other. I liked Aunt Ginny. She was the first person I had ever really gotten to know who wasn't a complete self-destructive narcissist. I learned a lot from her, most notably that life isn't supposed to be dreadful. I don't mean that there should never be hard times. I just mean that there's never a reason to behave dreadfully about it. She said to pity those who try to stop others from being happy. They're already living in hell, torturing themselves to prepare for their unending eternity of self-pity and misery. Aunt Ginny also told me to hide my happiness, because nothing is more fun for them to destroy than happiness. They are anti-life, disguised as life. You can tell the zombies from the humans because the zombies don't laugh at knock-knock jokes. Or at least, they don't laugh sincerely. There was a very hot summer day, and I was outside with Aunt Ginny. We were listening to the radio, which in those days was free, and played new music that was good. It was nothing like radio today. I began to feel an odd itching, both inside my head and inside my chest. It focused on my nose, but I could taste it on my tongue as well. It was a very odd, spicy yet sweet taste or smell, but it was itchy at the same time. I started sneezing, and then found it impossible to stop. They were very violent sneezes, but I was trying to stifle them. I was afraid of making a mess. I had no handkerchief or tissues or anything of that nature with me. When the sneezing finally stopped, Aunt Ginny was holding me and asking me if I was all right. I nodded yes, and we both looked around. We were both looking for the same thing, whatever it was that had caused me to sneeze like that. I was looking nearby, thinking that it might have been something in the air. The only time I had sneezed like that before was when my mom had spilled pepper. Aunt Ginny was more far-sighted than I, in both a literal and a figurative sense. She gasped and pointed toward the woods, where I instantly saw what she wanted me to see. There was a man there, with glowing eyes. My initial thought was, of course, Batman. It moved around, fidgeting for a second as it comprehended that both of us were now clearly noticing it. I could see it from the belly to its head, although it was under cover of the trees and shadow. Besides the eye shine like Batman in the animated TV series, it also had pointed ears on top of its head. I was honestly wondering why someone was modeling their homemade Batman costume in the forest behind my Aunt Ginny's house, when old Bruce Wayne there turned and abruptly walked away into the woods. It was not a human being that turned. Its chest and its shoulders were shaped all wrong. Its neck was too large, and its face was inhuman. This man did not have lips. He had a snout. His face looked like that of a dog. It wasn't Batman I was seeing. It was a Dogman. I got up to run after it. I needed to see more. I'd never seen a cryptid before. Aunt Ginny caught up with me and grabbed me, holding me tight. "You can't go chasing Dogman," she whispered in my ear. "Why not?" I whispered back. "Because nobody who does," she answered, "ever comes home to their Aunt Ginny." She made a running joke about how I could smell the Dogman. She said I was her early warning system. I had an allergy to the Dogman, and so if I started to sneeze a lot, she knew it was time to go inside. She always laughed after she said things like that, until one night, when she had a couple of glasses of wine, and then she said it all to me, very seriously. On that night, she told me that she doesn't like to admit how afraid she is of the Dogman. Aunt Ginny usually doesn't admit to thinking that they are real. She doesn't even want to think about them. She told me that she doesn't hate the Dogman. She just enjoys her life to a greater degree when he is less present than when he is more. One of the times my mother came to get me, I had a sneezing fit. It wasn't the last time my mother would pick me up from Aunt Ginny. This was one of the times she would take me, then soon pass me off on other relatives for a while before taking me back and giving me away again. I think I had 2 more stays coming with Aunt Ginny still at this point in time. Anyway, Mom came and was in one of her very important moods. You know, she was too important to be talking to both of us. She would ask us questions, then when we would start to answer, she would finish our sentences differently than how we were going to, then launch into a critique of the answer that we hadn't given. She was very impatient, very self-important, very self-pitying, and scary mean. When she felt sorry for herself, she would use that as an excuse to launch unforgivably horrible tirades and terrible temper tantrums. She could behave like a child, then have her lawyers ensure that innocent people were blamed, for the destructive results of her pointless and hateful false drama. If I hadn't been able to stay with Aunt Ginny, I would never have recognized that my mother was illness. She was illness using a human body to ply its trade of spreading malaise and malignancy. I wasn't happy to see her. In fact, merely being near her made me feel sick. But she wasn't why I sneezed. I knew that, and Aunt Ginny knew it too. We looked at each other, and then I sneezed some more. My mother was lecturing me about some sneeze-related thing, but I was ignoring her. I was looking around for the Dogman. I was standing behind Aunt Ginny when we both saw the Dogman at the same time. I could see her react in my peripheral vision, and there was no doubt this one was even larger than the last Dogman had been. The dog we were looking at was far more humanoid than the prior one. It was entirely jet black, from its pointed ears on top to its thin whip-like tail. It was Anubis, standing there naked as the forest it was inhabiting. A long-snouted, black-furred, black-eyed, clearly intelligent canine humanoid. It didn't care that I was seeing it through my bleary, watery, allergic eyes. It didn't care that Aunt Ginny was staring at it either. It was focused on my mother, glaring, with intense black eyes, on her back. I turned to look at her, my mother. She was facing away from us, still lecturing us about something, still on her high horse, still declaring her venomous opinion to the nobody that was listening. Oh, I shouldn't say nobody. The Dogman seemed to be listening to her. Aunt Ginny and I walked inside to watch and see whatever happened next. The house door slamming behind us seemed to have alerted my mother to the fact that nobody had been listening to her lecture for quite some time. She turned around, furious, and now lectured some different nobody about how outraged she was that her importance was not being recognized. The Dogman walked right out of the forest and directly toward her. She began glancing in his direction, as though she were including this new stranger in her wonderful lecture about how she was the only one in the world who was ever right about anything. I saw my mother do a classic old vaudeville double take when she saw that 6 or 7 foot tall, jackal-headed humanoid strolling casually toward her. I never saw anyone run so fast in heels before. Aunt Ginny and I were laughing so hard that we couldn't stand, and by the time my mother made it safely back inside the house, she was too winded to lecture us about it. That was the last time I would smell the Dogman on Aunt Ginny's property. In fact, that was the last time I would sense its presence at all anywhere, until over 10 years later, when I was going camping with the girlfriend that would become my future wife and mother of both of my children. I sometimes wonder if the reason I was given this allergy was just for me to use it on this one night when I was going to camp with my girlfriend. Let me explain how it happened. She brought me to some place in Pennsylvania to camp. It was not a standard campground. It was in the middle of a forest in Pennsylvania, and I didn't like it one bit. The entire place felt evil. But beyond that, we didn't have any kind of defense if a predator or a bad guy were to happen upon us. It all just seemed like a bad idea. My girlfriend thought it would be fun to have a scary adventure, but I don't think she really understood how dangerous it is to be in the middle of the woods with no weapons and nobody knowing where you are. She thought it was romantic, but I thought we were asking for trouble. Then, even before setting up our tent, I tasted that taste. I smelled that smell. I had a sneezing fit, a complete attack. My girlfriend got angry, thinking I was faking the sneezes or forcing them to happen. I had told her about Aunt Ginny. I had told her about the Dogman. She had humored me when I told her, not really believing it was all on the level. Now she was annoyed, not wanting this to be happening. I saw the Dogman. She saw the Dogman. We turned around, and we walked away. I think we stayed at a motel that night instead, which was an adventure all of its own. But we did not camp out, because I'm allergic to the Dogman. Maddie, wake up, the show's over.
Dear me, the show is over already? I hope it was scary. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our joking around today. We hope it lightened your load for at least a few minutes out of this very strange April. Above all, in these trying times, please try to always remember and never forget.
Okay, I give up. Does anyone have a tranquilizer gun? I know he's my cousin, but he's out of control. Well, I hope you folks liked our Madeline Stars special. I'm sorry my cousin stole the show. He's kind of a camera hog. Madeline has asked me to mention that she is appearing in Those American Girls, who are putting out new material during the lockdown on their 60,000 follower Twitter, which is @ThoseUSAGirls. So follow them there. Your old pal Bigfoot will return tomorrow with more scary Dogman stories to try to help you get through the lockdown. Hope to see you there. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
Come back for more scary stories.